Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay as we had to work through some of the technical aspects of this global meeting, but welcome. Welcome to the first of 3 thematic sessions today. This morning, our focus is on Romani past, dark chapters, and memorialization. My name is Nathan Mick, and I'm honored to be here and be your moderator today for this session. I'm a Romani American, and my family and I live in Lexington, Kentucky in the United States, and that is home to Kentucky Fried Chicken, if you were trying to make the connection there. I have served in a volunteer capacity on Roma issues for 2 decades with the U.S. Helsinki Commission, the U.S. State Department, and most recently with the United Nations Roma Advisory Council. And before we begin this session, I would like to request all of us here and those joining online to take a quiet moment together. I ask we take a moment to honor the past and those who came before us, and to think about your own reasons for why you're here and what we can accomplish working together. Please join me for a moment in this collective pause. Thank you. And I want to thank you for being here today. We welcome all of you in the room and thank participants from around the globe engaging with us online. Your passion, your capacity building, your advocacy throughout the years, it makes a difference. And you have educated on Roma concerns, and you have elevated discussion and action. And we are stronger because of you, and the future is brighter because of your efforts. And we thank you so much for all you do. And I also want to thank the United Nations and all partnering organizations for hosting this event and creating space for reflection, discussion, and coalition plans moving forward. In fact, if you are on the United Nations team, please raise your hand and let us recognize you for your hard work and organization of this event. Please raise your hands. Thank you so much. And if you are part of a partner organization, please, and you're here, please raise your hand or raise your hand online and join us in giving you a round of applause for your leadership. Thank you so much. And before I introduce our esteemed speakers and panelists, I'd like to set the table for this session on Romani past. Research by SEPS, a leading think tank on EU affairs and a key partner here today, shows that recognizing historically embedded anti-Gypsyism is the most important step toward addressing ongoing Roma discrimination in vital areas of life, such as housing, education, employment, healthcare, and access to justice. So we are here taking another important step together today in this moment through this international exchange and mutual learning to reflect on the past as we help shape the present and chart the future. And this session is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube, and the link will be posted in the chat. The event, as we know, is also having ongoing parallel translations into Spanish and Romani. And the recording will be available together with the final outcome report for the event on the SEPS website and reposted for partners as well. We encourage all of you as individuals and with organizations represented here today to share these links now and later on social media using the official hashtags that were mentioned earlier. And we'll be interacting during the event via the Twitter account, ChatGPT. The hashtags we are asking you to consider using are all in for minority rights, no anti-Gypsyism, fight racism. And all participants should be mindful to remain on topic and to respect the United Nations values when referring to countries and territories. The format of this session today will begin with our opening speaker for 10 minutes. Panelists will follow for 8 minutes each for their remarks to address the topic area for the session. Anna is our official timekeeper, and thank you very much to keep us on schedule. And there will be time at the end for question and answer following the remarks of our speaker and panelists. Online participants can use the Q&A section of the chat, and Claude will read the questions aloud, and we will address them with our panelists accordingly. And then in-person participants can certainly have interventions, and we'll give you about 2 minutes each for that, and then field the responses. So with the housekeeping out of the way, it is my honor now to introduce our distinguished speakers and panelists for the session. Dr. Julius Rostas will provide opening remarks, and Julius is an independent academic and member of the Chachipin research team, and he's the former chair of Romani Studies at Central European University. Ms. Miriam Karoli is a political scientist and human rights professional. She is also known to many for her decade of work at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, ODIHR, as the contact point for Roma and Sinti issues, and she's also a Chachipin advisor. Thank you. Ms. Anabel Caballo from Spain is the coordinator for the Federation of Roma Associations in Catalonia, and she's also on the Chachipin research team. Ms. Alina Gorilova is a social worker and Romani activist from Czechia, and Alina will be translated by Ms. Gwendolyn Albert, an independent human rights activist. And finally, we have Ms. Elisa Costa online with us from Brazil, and Elisa is president of the International Association of Mau Saracali. So with that, Julius, welcome, thank you, and you have the floor.
Romale, penalita chavale, mistora kremtut. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'll talk about memorialization and the Roma. And before starting my presentation, I would like to remind you of the paper I co-authored with Lina and Martin Kalantai on transitional justice and the Roma. You can read it because it's an important document trying to lay down some of the arguments why to use transitional justice tools in combating what we call anti-Gypsyism. So coming back to the topic I'm supposed to talk about, I'll make 4 brief points. I'll talk about the legal dimension of memorialization. I'll talk about the current state of Roma memorialization. I'll try to look into some explanations. And of course, I have a few conclusions. So let me start with the legal dimension. There is no right to memory in the international law. However, this can be deducted because on the one hand, memory is about the recognition of a group, of an ethnic group. Yeah. And there are a number of countries, especially in Europe, that do recognize Roma as a national minority. But memory is also about the identity of a group. And here, there is something that cannot be denied, that there is a group of people all around the world, yeah, that self-identify as Roma and some other names, and that affirm their common identity and history. My point is the following, that depriving people of the memory of their past is a denial of their identity. And to me, this represents an egregious form of oppression that Roma have to suffer nowadays. Based on the international human rights law, there is a duty of the state to protect and to create conditions for the expression of ethnic identity of minorities. And therefore, yeah, there is a duty to create the conditions to express Romani identity in the public sphere. Of course, there is a right to know in the international law, and especially based on what is known as transitional justice. There is a right to know that was also recognized by the Council of Europe in a document dated June 22nd of June 2021 that refers to the right of citizens to know the different stages of public policies that the government are enacting. Of course, this right to know is not absolute, and the government has the right to withhold information. Now, of course, the question is, does the government have the right to withhold information on the Roma past? What would be the reason for that? Well, one of the leading scholars when it comes to human rights, Louise Henkin, says the following, that the government can withhold information only when it serves a public interest. At this stage, I cannot find a public interest. I cannot imagine a public interest of a government to withhold information on Romani past and the sufferings of Roma throughout history. Now, of course, if you want to learn more about transitional justice, and we are very glad to have today with us Professor Lavinia Stan, who is one of the editors or the leading editor of the Encyclopedia of Transitional Justice. So you can go and search there more on transitional justice. However, this was just a brief legal introduction to what is memorialization about and its foundations. Let me go to the second stage and see where we stand with memorialization when it comes to Roma. There are very few Romani identity representation institutions. Almost no state institutions. Of course, there are few notable examples, but mostly we talk about private initiatives, sometimes supported by state through funding. As examples, it's the Brno Museum of Romani Culture, European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture, Roma Philharmonic, Roma Documentation Center in Heidelberg, and so on. School curricula exclude information on Roma history and culture or include biased information on Roma. Romani studies programs in universities are really few. Here is some explanation of the current state. We have Roma as the most hated group in Europe. Now, research by Pew Research Center, and if you check our paper, you have that there, shows that from far, Roma is the most hated group, irrespective of Jews, immigrants, Muslims, and so on. How we ended up here, on the one hand, is because states focus too much on social economic inclusion of Roma, defining Roma as a social issue. States also attempted to assimilate or exterminate Roma through our history. States also ignored Roma, their claims and their needs. There is even a state of impunity of gross human rights violations that are not properly investigated and sanctioned. And here the European Court of Human Rights case law is an example. We have denial of racism and discrimination, and we even have cultural appropriation. Key to understand all these processes is the widespread belief in the superiority of other groups when comparing to Roma. That's key to understand, because the others believe that they are superior to Roma. That's key. In fact, that's the essence of racism. And now, since I have only a few seconds left, I'll just try to conclude. Here are my conclusions. On the one hand, the European Commission set combating anti-Gypsyism as a policy objective in the strategy on Roma, and member states should follow this model. But my question is it possible to combat racism against Roma without reconciliation? Memorialization is fundamental in combating racism, but it's not the first element in combating racism. First, it's about establishing the truth and investigating the truth. So here it is, production of knowledge, transmitting this knowledge to the public through education, and instituting practices of commemoration and memorializations are key to address reconciliation. And of course, Roma participation, here I mean Roma leading initiatives, is key for the process of memorialization, achieving reconciliation and trust building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elias. I'll pass it to Miriam.
So thank you all for the opportunity of being here. Thank you for the organizers, to the moderator, the friends, and also the professional collaborators for all these years. I would like to briefly draw your attention to, like, really globally what has happened during the Holocaust of Roma, and also what was the typology, how was the response in post-war societies, because I think it's something we can see in many other places today, or it relates to a specific pattern. So thank you for being here and having the opportunity to discuss one of the most pressing human rights issues in Europe, how to bring justice and recognition to gross human rights violation and the genocide of Roma people in Europe. I'm addressing you on one hand as a Roma human rights professional, but also as a Romani woman from Austria whose family suffered from Nazi persecution, and as a daughter of a man who was born in a lager, Lackenbach, a concentration camp which was set in Austria in 1939 for Roma. My father was lucky because he and his family had survived, but most of the Burgenland Roma, the community my father belongs to, were detained in Lackenbach, did not survive due to the inhuman conditions, the typhoid in the lager, or due to the forced labor, or because they were deported to other lagers to Poland, from which they never returned. Racist policies, exclusion, expulsion, and killing of Romani people continued over centuries in Europe and culminated in the Nazi persecution and genocide during World War II. Up to 500,000 Roma died. In some countries, almost 90% of the Roma population was annihilated during the Nazi era, as for example in Austria, but also the Czech Republic. In other countries under the Nazi rule, the death toll might be smaller, but also there, Roma were victims of racist policies, shooting, deportation, and annihilation, and left the survivors and following generation with a big trauma. Similar to racial ideology against Jews, the racist Nazi ideology exploited existing prejudices and stereotypes against Roma, creating a racial profile defining Romani people as being asocial or criminal by nature, meaning by their biology a blot, so they could not escape it. According to the Nazi ideology, Roma had to be deported and killed as a crime preventive measure and keep society pure. In many countries, the Nazis could build on the work of police, who had already started in the early 1930s to register Romani people as a crime preventive measure and to control them. While many Romani people in Europe did not survive or were heavily traumatized by the persecution during the Nazi era or in countries under the Nazi rule, the specific form of racism continued. Just as an example, in Austria after 1945, there were almost no Roma in Austria anymore. Still, the Ministry of Interior issued an instruction in 1948, ordering to not allow Romani people entering the border or to expel them. But there was no one here. Also, the stereotypes that Romani people are asocial or criminals continue to be reinforced in post-war societies and is still present in many places today. Just carefully look at public or political discourses about Romani people. I was very inspired of the special rapporteur's presentation, and I was wondering if you would look at the post-war decades as a transitional period. I would say we can say there was impunity, denial, and further discrimination. So it failed to bring justice to the victims. In fact, post-war societies did not recognize the crimes against humanity, against Romani people, nor did they come to terms with the past. The opposite. Perpetrators were not persecuted, victims were not recognized nor compensated. The sufferings of Roma during the Nazi era was also not commemorated or taught in school. Research on the Holocaust did not account to what had happened to Romani people. It was not promoted nor financed, nor was there any agency to represent the voice of Romani survivors. The little accounts we have from the first 2 or 3 decades of Romani survivors are an exception, often the result of few individuals who reached out to victim groups and survivors, and often they were Jewish survivors themselves. When reparation processes started, Roma were absent from the victim groups or told their racial persecution was a matter of crime prevention, so following the Nazi ideology. There was also no decent memorialization. Hardly any country has taken the initiative to build decent memorials. In some countries, it was a hard struggle. And I just want to remind you, on the Czech Republic, on the former ground of a concentration camp in Lety, a pig farm was established and was only removed very recently, after years of protests by Roma civil society and the international community. This all created an environment of injustice and was a fruitful ground to nurture further racism and discrimination against Roma in Europe. On the survivors, victims, and the following generations, it left a big trauma. They had no one to talk to. Had big losses in their community and suffered from crimes against humanity. But there was no apology. I'm sorry. There was no apology, no regret, no recognition, but further humiliation. In some countries, racist policies continued or re-emerged in post-war societies. Just to mention the registration of Roma by police as a crime preventive measure, which we have seen in Germany or Sweden. Or the practice to sterilize Roma women to reduce the birth rate of Roma. Look at Switzerland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, or Hungary. But also the pattern of exclusion and segregation and the stigma of being labeled asocial or criminal continues. We also have heard that we have seen this in post-conflict context or in Spain. So I want to look also again at what do we need for transitional justice and reflect a bit what has happened in the post-war societies. And I'm speaking about the 2 to 3 decades after the war. Truth, until today, little, then nothing. There was no research. Justice, it failed. Reparations, partly, but from the 80s onwards, generally, I would say it failed. Guarantees of non-recurrence, kind of absent because there was no acknowledgement. Memorialization, I would say probably one of the things which until today most have happened, but in post-war decades, the first 2 or 3 decades, none. I have prepared a little bit more on the time from the 80s to now and also the role of civil society and international community, but I think we can talk about it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. And thank you for sharing and reminding us of that past, which feels all too present. Thank you. I want to turn it over to Annabelle here.
It's going to be hard. So, well, I have only 8 minutes. We know it's very hard, and I'm going to talk about Roma during Franco dictatorship, and always is not be a topic of discussion. Before getting into the specific topic of my presentation, I would like to make clear about 2 issues. The first one is anti-Gypsyism in Spain didn't start with Franco dictatorship in 1939. Before that, there were more than 200 Spanish pragmatist laws, or what is anti-Gypsy laws, which affect Roma strongly to Spanish Roma. including slavery, deportation to Latin America, first attempt of a genocide against Roma by a mother state in 1749, what is called the Great Gizeh Roma. And now getting into the topic, as Ismail mentioned, and it is been said all morning, little we know, or little Spain wants to know about it. We know more about history of 17th, 18th century, but we don't know anything about recent history. The research that my colleague Pedro Casermeiro and I will doing in the context of the Chachipen project is a very little research, and we hope this is like a spark to investigate further. And we are based on testimonies who lived during the Franco dictatorship, because as was mentioned this morning, the voice of the victims are very important. Why? As Ismail mentioned, there is no real research in Spain about the persecution of Roma during the dictatorship. We know few things. We heard about the elderly people is explaining in the context of the family, but there are no official documents, and the little official documents are made by the oppressors, not by the Roma community. So this is why important we need this research, because if we don't know the truth, we cannot ask for recognition. And if we don't have recognition, we don't have justice, we don't have reparations, compensations, memorialization, etc. So far, we know, also Ismail mentioned it before, that Franco inherits the historical collective imaginary of the gypsies, and also the law of vagrants from 1933, promulgated during the Second Republic. The law of vagrants are very important because made Roma guilty and allowed the authorities to punish Roma people without having committed any crime other than appearing dangerous to the public, or the very similar to the laws during the nation regime. Franco took the power in 1939 when the Second World War began, and with the persecution of Roma stepped up in Europe, and then later the deportations and extermination. It is important to mention this because the collaboration between the two regimes probably promote the intensification of the persecution of the Roma in Spain. We know by Ian Hancock in his book, The Pariah Syndrome, he speaks about the writing letters between the two regimes, about around 1942. And what a coincidence, because 1 year later in 1943, it was approved the regulation of the civil guard in Spain, with 3 articles, 4, 5, and 6, which is targeting directly Roma, than it used at that time the scrupulous surveillance control of gypsies, their way of life and their movements. So we did have at that time the repressive legal framework with the law of vagrants, and then the repressive tool with the regulation of the civil guard. Both gave total freedom, legal freedom, for the persecution, harassment, murders, and the goal was promote the terror among Roma, state terror. In order to write, explain, or document about the persecution, we are taking the voice of the Roma to create a contra-narrative of the narrative of oppressors. This is very important because it has not been taken into consideration before. There is no research about testimonies in Spain. Our research is not finished yet. And what we can tell you about so far, firstly, it is very hard to collect the voice of the Roma. Fear, after 40 years after the end of the dictator, is still there, because anti-Gypsyism didn't stop after the death of the dictator. And this is also important, okay? The continuous abusing, humiliation, harassment, beating by the civil guards is still in the memory of the Roma in Spain. And they don't want to talk because still today fears about the police. Bear in mind that these police people, the civil guard, continue their work after the dictatorship when Spain became a democratic state. So you have to deal still with the same people as it happens in Germany and in the rest of the countries in Europe. Special attention, please. I don't know how much time I have left, but special attention, 2 minutes, to the Romani woman, the history of the Romani woman. We know, we cannot prove it by direct testimony, but we know about the rapes against Romani women. And we don't know about direct testimony because many Romani women feel ashamed of it. It's like betraying the honor of the family. You know, we need Romani women to stand up. We have today in this panel a Romani woman, and I really wish that she can be like a reference for the Spanish Romani woman. We know by testimony about specific prisons for Romani women. There is no documentation about, but we have the testimony. This is why very important. Ismail spoke about this new democratic memory law approved in Spain in July, and about the creation of this specific commission in Spain for the Roma history, that it has to begin. It is important, as Albioli mentioned this morning, that in this commission, of course, we need experts because we need to investigate the truth, but we need the participation of the community and we need the voice of the victims. But for that, we have to create a safe environment for the people to speak. If we are not able to create this safe environment, I don't know how to say in English, but this safe environment for them to speak, nobody's going to speak. And it's our last chance. 1 minute, thank you. It's our last chance to collect testimonies, because we are talking that many of our testimonies are dead. So this is why it's a unique opportunity with the law to investigate further, to know the truth, what is happening, to have this recognition, justice, and then we will talk about compensation and reparation. And I leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. And a reminder in your remarks too, that the past isn't really the past, but it still affects what we are doing now and in our discussions on the present. And thank you for sharing those concrete examples. Alina, I'm going to turn it over to you, and really appreciate you being here and your global voice and sharing your story. And so we turn the floor to you.
Dobrý den, mé jméno je Elena Gorolová a jsem z České republiky a již skoro 20 let bojuji za práva nedobrovolně sterilizovaných žen.
Hello, my name is Elena Gorolova. I come from the Czech Republic, and I've been fighting for the rights of women who've been sterilized without their informed consent for almost 20 years.
Sama jsem jednou z nich. Jsem také Romka, stejně jako většina ostatních obětí protiprávní sterilizace. Tyto sterilizace byly ostatně motivovány právě záměrem regulovat počet dětí lidí, které stát považoval za nežádoucí.
I myself am one of these women. I am also Romani, just like most of the other victims of these illegal sterilizations. These sterilizations were motivated by an intention to regulate the number of children being born to people whom the state considered undesirable.
Ženy, které se staly obětmi těchto praktik, již mají kořeny hluboko v totalitě. Bojovaly dlouhé roky za spravedlnost. Mnoho z nich je dnes v pokročilém věku a v křehkém zdravotním stavu.
The women who have been targeted by these practices, which are deeply rooted in the totalitarian era, have fought for justice for many long years. Many of them today are of an advanced age and in fragile health.
Jako oběti se však před těmi 18 lety spojili, založili jsme spolek žen obětí protiprávní sterilizace a společnými silami jsme vedli boj za odškodnění. Některé ženy se snažily bránit soudně, ale během let se změnila soudní praxe. V České republice ohledně promlčení nemajetkové újmy a není již možné na soudní odškodnění dosáhnout, neboť nárok se promlčuje již po 3 letech.
We came together as victims 18 years ago and established the informal group of women harmed by forced sterilization. And through our common efforts, we fought for compensation. Some women also sued in court, but over the years, judicial practice in the Czech Republic changed with regard to the statutes of limitations on non-pecuniary harms. and it became impossible for most of us to achieve compensation through the courts, as the entitlement to such compensation now expires 3 years after the harm is committed.
Problematikou protiprávních sterilizací se zabývá již ombudsman v roce 2005, kde shledal porušení práv a jiné případy byly až u Evropského soudu pro lidské práva. Přesto České republice trvalo dalších 16 let přijmout zákon o odškodnění.
The issue of illegal sterilizations was reviewed by the Czech ombudsman in 2005 when he found that our rights had been violated, and other cases have made it all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. Despite this fact, it took the Czech Republic another 16 years to adopt a compensation law.
Před rokem se nám po téměř 20letém boji podařilo díky domácím a mezinárodním lidskoprávním organizacím ve spolupráci s mezinárodními tělesy jako OSN a Rada Evropy prosadit zákon, díky kterému má český stát odškodnit oběti nedbaloudných sterilizací, které se děly na území České od roku 66 do roku 2012. Tento zákrok byl schválen a podporu napříč demokratickým politickým spektrem.
1 year ago, after almost 20 years of struggle and thanks to domestic and international human rights organizations in collaboration with human rights bodies such as the United Nations and the Council of Europe, we managed to push through a law thanks to which the Czech state must compensate the victims of illegal sterilizations performed on Czech territory between 1966 and 2012. This law was adopted with support across the democratic political spectrum.
Po jeho schválení mezi obětmi převládlo nadšení, radost a úleva, že je dobojováno. To jsme ale ještě nevěděli, že dobojováno není.
After the law was adopted, the victims were enthusiastic, happy, and relieved to have won the fight. What we did not yet know was that the fight was not yet over.
V lednu jsme ve spolupráci 2 neziskových organizací Vzájemné soužití a Liga lidských práv zahájili činnost Centra pro oběti nedobrovolné sterilizace. V rámci tohoto centra ženám pomáháme sepsat a podat žádost a taky jim pomáháme s případným odvoláním a navázali jsme spolupráci i s pro bono advokáty, kteří jsou ochotní pomoci se soudním řízením. Centrum pro oběti nedobrovolné sterilizace mohly vzniknout díky podpoře z norských fondů.
In January, in collaboration with 2 nonprofits, the Human Rights League and Life Together, we launched the work of the Center for the Victims of Involuntary Sterilizations. As part of this center, we aid women with writing and filing their applications, and we also assist them with filing appeals. We've begun collaborations with pro bono attorneys who are willing to help us with court proceedings as well. The center was able to come about thanks to support from Norway grants.
Zákon je účinný již více než půl roku a již více než 300 žen požádalo o odškodnění. Na odškodnění jich zatím dosáhlo kolem 80.
The law has been in effect for more than half a year now, and already more than 300 women have applied for compensation. So far, just about 80 of them have been awarded compensation.
Mé samotné ještě o žádosti ani nerozhodli, ačkoliv jsem již podala již v dubnu a zákon ukládá 2měsíční lhůtu po rozhodnutí. Ozvali se mi i ženy, které podali žádost již v lednu, že ještě nemají rozhodnutí.
My own application has yet to be decided, even though I filed it in April, and the law requires the decision to be made within 2 months. Women have contacted me who filed their applications in January and who have yet to receive a decision.
Nedodržování této lhuty je ale jenom jedním z problémů, ačkoliv záměrem zákona je odškodnit oběti z celého období od roku 1996 do roku 2012. České ministerstvo zdravotnictví neuznává jiné důkazy než zdravotnickou dokumentaci.
Failure to meet these deadlines is just one problem, though. While the intention of this law is to compensate victims to whom this happened between 1966 and 2012, the Czech Health Ministry so far has failed to recognize any evidence of these harms other than medical records.
Ta je ale u mnohých žen skartována nebo zničena. V některých případech je dokonce skartování protizákonně. Takové případy nechce ministerstvo posuzovat a my nevíme, co bude dál.
For many of these women, their medical records have either become somehow damaged or have been officially shredded, and in some cases they have even been shredded unlawfully. The ministry does not want to adjudicate such cases, and we do not know what will happen next with regard to compensating these victims.
Nelíbí se nám přístup ministerstva zdravotnictví, protože na začátku bylo řečeno něco úplně jiného. Ministerstvo přece ví, že mnohé z důkazů, že sterilizace proběhla, byly zničeny.
We disagree with the approach being taken by the ministry towards such cases because in the beginning of our negotiations with them about this law, the position they took was absolutely different. The ministry knows, after all, that much of the evidence of the sterilizations having been performed has already been destroyed.
Doufali jsme, protože ministerstvu bude stačit i potvrzení, že dokumentace těchto obětí byla skartovaná. Jako občanská společnost jsme ministru zdravotnictví zaslali otevřený dopis, ve kterém jsme apelovali, aby ministerstvo zdravotnictví vyřešilo především tyto dva problémy: nedržování lhuty a nepřijímání jiných důkazů.
We hoped that the ministry would be able to somehow work with these confirmations that the documentation had been shredded, and as members of civil society, together with many allies, we sent an open letter to the health minister calling on the ministry to resolve these two problems first and foremost: the failure to meet the legally prescribed deadline and the failure to accept other kinds of evidence that the sterilization happened without the patient's informed consent.
Na tento dopis minister ani ministerstvo nijak nereagovali. Ministerstvo zdravotnictví nekomunikuje prakticky s nikým, ani s občanskou společností, ani se žadatelkami, které jsou z celého procesu jen v nejistotě a stresu.
Neither the minister himself nor the ministry has responded to our letter. The ministry communicates with almost nobody about these cases, not with members of civil society and not with the applicants, who remain in a position of stress and uncertainty throughout this entire process.
Zároveň je dnes ombudsmanem člověk, jehož jednání nekoresponduje s tím, jak by měl jeho úřad rozhodovat a pomáhat lidem. Dokonce z jeho úst zazněly i výroky na hraně rasismu. Nelze tedy očekávat, že by oběti nedobrovolné sterilizace nalezly zastání zde. Zbývá tedy pouze soudní cesta.
We also face a circumstance in which the current holder of the office of the ombudsman is not a person whose behavior corresponds to how that office is meant to make decisions or aid people in their negotiations with the state. Remarks bordering on racism have been made by him more than once. It cannot therefore be anticipated that the forced sterilization victims will be able to count on him to back them up, and that means the only thing left is for these women to sue.
Chci vám říct alespoň v krátkosti příběh jedné ze žadatelek, kterým jsme pomohli žádost podat, abych ilustrovala, jakým způsobem nyní rozhodování probíhá. Ministerstvo zdravotnictví této žadatelce žádost zamítlo, ačkoliv doložila svou zdravotnickou dokumentaci. Ženě byl zákrok proveden již v roce 1979 a zároveň v nemocnici, která už neexistuje.
I would like to briefly tell you the story of one such woman whom we aided with applying for compensation so I can illustrate how the decision-making at the ministry is currently happening. The health ministry has rejected her application, even though she provided her medical records to them. She was sterilized in 1979 at a hospital that no longer exists.
Ačkoliv sama svou dokumentaci měla a ministerstvu ji zaslala, originál již neexistuje a byl skartován, protože skartační lhůta činí 40 let. Ministerstvo zdravotnictví ve rozhodnutí říká, že nemůže vědět, jestli v její zdravotnické dokumentace některé listiny nechybí, tudíž jej nelze považovat za dostatečný důkaz.
While the woman had long held on to copies of her medical records and provided them to the ministry, the originals no longer exist because they were shredded after being kept on hand for 40 years as required by law. In its decision, the ministry says it cannot know whether something is or is not missing from the copies of the medical records she has submitted, and that therefore they cannot be considered sufficient evidence.
Ministerstvo tady nepřímo obvinuje žadatelku z manipulace s důkazy a lží. Takový přístup žadatelkám je samozřejmě velmi bolestivý a nedůstojný. I odvolání k ministru zdravotnictví bylo v tomto případě bohužel zamítnuto a žadatelka tak bude muset pokračovat soudní cestou, která je vždy zdlouhavá, nákladná a náročná.
The ministry is indirectly accusing this applicant of manipulating the evidence she is providing and of deception. Such an approach toward an applicant is naturally quite harmful and undignified. Her appeal to the health minister was unfortunately rejected, and she will have to continue to seek compensation through the courts, a process that is always arduous, costly, and protracted.
Závěrem chci říct především toto. My jako oběti shledáváme celou situaci jako bolestivou a jsme nuceni znovu otvírat své traumata. Doufali jsme, že schválením zákona jsme již dosáhli spravedlnosti.
In closing, I would like to say this most of all. We, the victims, find this entire situation painful, and we are being forced to relive our trauma once more. We had hoped that with the adoption of this law, we would have achieved justice for all of us.
Bohužel tomu tak není a my musíme i nadále pokračovat v veřejném vystupování, kontaktu s médií a pořád protesty. Chci taky vyjádřit hluboké zklamání z přístupu ministerstva zdravotnictví a z toho, jakým způsobem zachází se zákonem, který by měl být nápravou nespravedlivého zacházení a poškozování lidských práv ze strany státu. Místo toho jsou oběti znovu traumatizované a mnoho z nich na odškodnění nedosáhne.
Unfortunately, that is not the case, and we have to continue to appear in public, to contact the media, and to organize protests so we can be heard. I would like to express my deep disappointment over the approach being taken by the Health Ministry and over the way it is handling this law, which was meant to be a remedy for the fact that the state has treated us unjustly and violated our human rights. Instead, the victims are re-traumatized, and many of them will never be compensated.
Naše práce ještě není u konce, ale máme stále naději. Chci dodat odvahu všem obětem protiprávních sterilizací i v jiných státech, kde tato praxe probíhala a které se stály ze svou minulosti nevypořádali. Bojujte za svou věc a spravedlnost. Je nutné, aby demokratické státy dodržovaly lidské práva a vyrovnaly se ze svou minulosti, a aby byla taková závažná porušení lidských práv odškodněna a nenapravena.
Our work is not over
A
yet.
napravena. Tak.
Our work is not over yet, but we still have hope. I want to encourage all victims of forced sterilizations in other states where this has happened and where this past has not yet been dealt with properly. Fight for your cause and for justice. Democratic states have to uphold human rights and come to terms with the past, and these serious human rights violations must be compensated and redressed.
Chtěla bych moc poděkovat, že jste nás pozvali, a je mi velice líto, že musím sdělovat tyto věci, které vlastně nefungují v České republice jako ministerstvo zdravotnictví, protože naše ženy velmi trpí tím, že už si prošly sterilizaci a trpí tím, jak vlastně ministerstvo teď s nima zachází.
Thank you very much for inviting us to speak here. I deeply regret that I have to bring you this news about the way the process is being handled in the Czech Republic, because our women suffered enough already with being sterilized without their informed consent, and now they're suffering again with the way that the ministry is administering the compensation process. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you. This is a very difficult situation. It needs to be resolved. And your story needs to be heard. And it's the human story that has the most impact. And so your advocacy and your leadership are inspiring, not just on the sterilization issue, but as Annabelle said, voices need to be put forward and people need to be able to share. This is not easy, but you do inspire others to come forward around the globe and talk about their issues and talk about it to governments and civil society that can repost and promote and amplify your story as well. So thank you for being here and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I want to turn it over to our final panelist, Elisa, who is online with us from Brazil. Elisa, welcome. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos. ¿Me escuchan bien?
Sí.
Un saludo especial a mis compañeras y compañeros. Muchas gracias por la invitación, la oportunidad de compartir un poco sobre estos asuntos relevantes desde Brasil, un país tan desconocido en el escenario de las minorías, un país de dimensiones continentales que sigue confundido entre las notas técnicas y la realidad del pueblo romani. El silencio siempre ha sido una marca fuerte en la trayectoria del pueblo gitano en tierras brasileñas. Este silencio se ha cobrado un alto precio y ciertamente nos llevará algunos años más a alinear las cosas. Es un hecho que hay dos versiones. Uno proveniente de libros e investigaciones escritas, editadas por los no pertenecientes a nuestro pueblo, y por otro lado, el silencio. Es necesario resignificar los rumos y las estrategias de esta historia y contar nuestras memorias. Hoy en día estos recuerdos siguen siendo a veces borrados y a veces silenciados. Los métodos hay cambiados, son nuevos, otros siguen iguales, con ropa nueva. No olvidemos un hecho muy importante y triste. En Brasil de hoy, 77 años después de los días de horror, todavía se permanece en silencio. Sin embargo, a principio, los investigadores denunciaron este año que el fascismo ha aumentado en 270% solo en los últimos 3 años, acá en Brasil. Hay más de 530 células repartidas, principalmente en la región del sur, centroeste y sudeste del país. Lo que nos asusta es que estas regiones tienen el mayor contingente de romanis y sinti del país. La falta de leyes y penas y el discurso de odio son las mayores causas de este avance que se aplica en pueblo Romani en Brasil. Estos discursos de odio, la discriminación y los estereotipos siguen contribuyendo clara y excludentemente a este escenario. Según nuestras investigaciones, solo el año pasado, unas 32 denuncias atribuyeron a los llamados asinritanos algún acto de delito o discurso peyorativo. Llevamos años luchando y denunciando estos actos, desgraciadamente sin muchos avances y sin ninguna sanción. En la investigación en centros de educación y enseñanza, a muchos, 2011, los niños Romani son los más discriminados, lo que justifica una vez más el silencio. El trato discriminatorio continúa en varios ámbitos. ¿Cómo tener la dimensión sin censo? ¿Cómo formular leyes coherentes sin datos verdaderos? ¿Cómo utilizar el pasado para reconstruir el presente en medio a la política que fue abandonada? No hay cifras fiables en Brasil. Somos la primera organización en Brasil que trabaja con datos y análisis de microdatos y seguimos de cerca el grave problema de la desinformación, la máquina política para mantener los estereotipos y la falta de transparencia y voluntad política. Nos costó mucho entender el ciclo actual, pero sigue siendo el mismo. El miedo, la vergüenza y el silenciamiento son costumbres y combustibles poderosos. Lo ilustraré con las palabras de dos mujeres que nacieron en Brasil, que están acá, una Calderache y otra Cintiza. Una dice: es lamentable la noticia que llega, llevamos aproximadamente séculos y las transformaciones no cambiaron la historia. Por desgracia, lo que no cambia es la intolerancia, los prejuicios y la imposición del más fuerte. Hay extremistas en todo el mundo. Tengo un abuelo ruso, una abuela polaca y familiares en Ucrania, Rusia, Brasil y España. La única cosa que tengo es la oración. pero todavía veo mi mirada asustada, la mirada asustada de mi madre y el silencio de mis abuelos era ensurdecedor. No puedo estar en silencio. Yo no puedo estar en silencio. Elizabeth Martinho, Romi, profesora e investigadora. Gloria Stefanovsky, Sintiza, nos dice, mi recuerdo, mi abuelo vivía en los rincones silenciosos sin vida. Dicieran, era otra persona. No había ningún sorriso. Sigo siendo hoy esta niña que decidió no morir por dentro. La niña que quería romper el cielo, que quería romper el viento. Contar nuestras historias y romper vientos. Por eso estamos acá. Creo que todos conocemos muy bien el poder destructivo del discurso de odio, año tras año, del daño generacional que causa, del miedo que no pasa. También podemos decir con certeza que toda la unidad concedida, que se dice que hay libertad, no hay. No hay. También hay que prestar atención en los discursos que cada gobierno y otros mecanismos están manejando hoy, en este momento. La mayoría de estas cosas no podemos decir que es muy humana con nosotros. Imaginamos un gran tablero donde 90% de las piezas de este juego son peones. De resto, tenemos el poder de las innumerables iglesias representadas en las torres, los reyes como gobernantes, y gobernando todos los demás papeles tendremos a los caballos de Troya y la reina en un desafortunado papel de la prensa actual que sirve con las fake news. Esta agenda tiene que estar en el derecho humano y no solamente en la justicia. Tenemos que tener nuestra humanidad reconocida. Tiene que ser en la educación el reconocimiento de una agenda decolonialista, en la lucha contra el racismo estructural, en la valorización de la memoria y en la acción afirmativa constante, día tras día. Nuestras agendas no se construyen a través de luxuosas reuniones con aire acondicionado, con muchas bebidas, muchas comidas, de nada de humanidad. Hay que entender un poco y seguir luchando. Dosta. A pesar de la revuelta, del dolor, de todo lo que sucede en una vida cotidiana, de supuesta normalidad, donde no podemos dejar de tener en cuenta que detrás de cada número hay una persona. Necesitamos saber cuántas personas de etnia Romani tiene en Brasil. Aprovecho para hacer saber que Brasil recibió, no como una madre gentil, innumerables inmigrantes, hombres, mujeres, niños, familias enteras, atrás de sus fronteras, legal y ilegalmente, y que aún hoy viven sus tradiciones de la puerta para adentro en silencio, que muchos que muchos de nuestros ríos siguen recibiendo flores. Buenos, gracias. Gracias por escucharnos. Gracias por darnos voz. Un especial afecto y agradecimiento a los que luchan de nuestro lado, que nos escuchan, a señora Belén Rodríguez, Fernán Perenes, un abrazo especial a Aline Miklos, al señor Jan Jarab, por su esfuerzo, por su escucha. Una mención de reconocimiento y agradecimiento a todos los miembros de nuestra organización y organizaciones hermanas que a través de Peovoria Stefanovsky del Observatorio de Mujeres Gitanas, de Bibi, Elizabeth Kutzmenda, da MSK y de los hermanos de la Unión Romani Internacional. Nice to meet you. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Elisa, and great to see you from Brazil, and warm greetings to you and all Romani there. And we look forward to being with you in person at some point in the future too. So thank you. That concludes the remarks from our initial remarks from our panelists, but I want to move it over to some online interventions and also in the room for the balance of our time here. And we have some of these organized already. So I want to turn it over to Dominan Christo here for, and you have a couple minutes of remarks. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bueno, me presento ante todo, soy Damián Cristo, presidente de Sola Argentina, Asociación por los
How can I do with the translation?
I think you have to do, can you do consecutive for him?
Or we can put English channel, but we ask our translators to speak after him.
Okay, consecutive after, yeah. We have,
If our translators are okay, we can keep English channel and you will just wait after he finishes.
can someone move a microphone closer to him?
¿Puedes acercarte?
Pero tal vez este no.
Claro.
Muchas
gracias.
Ahí, sentado.
Sí.
Ok.
Bueno, ante todo me presento, soy Damián Cristo de Argentina, presidente de SOR, Asociación por los Derechos del Pueblo Gitano Romaní. Donde recibimos políticas públicas.
Sorry, for interpreters, can we ask you to do subsequent? So just finish when,
Yes.
for the Spanish only. For Romani, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Ok. Me presento nuevamente, soy Damián Cristo, presidente de SOR Argentina. Represento al pueblo gitano romaní en el país. Soy recibido en políticas públicas, estoy por terminar la licenciatura en políticas públicas también. Soy padre valentino de 12 años y activista desde que tengo uso de razón. Verbo come out to say hello. ¿No?
Interpretation?
Verbo come out to say hello a silent Romain. El chico se querer. Además, calesa, obesa, tibete. Voy a empezar hablando de la historia de mi familia. Mi familia consta de dos grandes apellidos, los Cristo, que es el apellido que llevo actualmente, y los Dimitrevich. Por parte de los Dimitrevich, familia. La familia de Dimitrevich tuvo la suerte de ser grandes artistas en su totalidad, desde los niños hasta los más grandes. Gracias a eso, lograron escapar de Francia a Brasil por un salvoconducto que les dio un cónsul brasilero, porque era fan de su arte y de sus bailes. Dos tías mías quedaron en Francia resistiendo, las cuales las dos fueron encerradas en cárceles nazis y campamentos. Lograron sobrevivir gracias nuevamente a su arte y a su influencia con la política nacional. Luego de eso se refugiaron en campos y pudieron sobrevivir también. Los Cristo no corrieron con esa suerte en su totalidad. Los Cristo en su vida a Europa, la cual no tenemos demasiados datos y creo que eso nos interpela a todos como sociedad gitana y como organización mundial. Ellos escaparon también gracias a un salvoconducto de un alto mando nazi. Ellos escaparon supuestamente a América la Grande, América y París. Fueron a Latinoamérica finalmente, erróneamente. Sobre este tema quiero exponer y quiero iniciar sobre la memoria y el reconocimiento. Para tener reconocimiento tenemos que empezar a ser ciudadanos del mundo de primera y no de segunda, como nos trata la totalidad de los gobiernos. Necesitamos, nuevamente repito, números sobre los gitanos en los países. Por ejemplo, en Argentina fuimos a varias reuniones para intentar entrar en el último censo de este año y no lo logramos. El gobierno argentino no tiene datos sobre los gitanos. Para tener una gran solución necesitamos medidas certeras, que los gobiernos mundiales nos acompañen en esto. Y confiamos en Naciones Unidas que nos va a acompañar reclamando ejes comunes para todos los países del mundo y para todos los ciudadanos del mundo que sean Roma. El Holocausto no terminó cuando terminó el régimen nazi. No tenemos números de la gente que murió escapando de los nazis. Ni tenemos un número certero de encerrados en campos de concentración. Por esto es muy importante para una posible solución, para un posible comienzo, que Naciones Unidas nos acompañe en cada acción y que inste a los gobiernos realmente a reconocernos como ciudadanos de primera y sujetos de derechos sobre todo. Para esto es necesario que la comunidad romaní también se involucre. Este no es un tema de Gallet, sino que de toda nuestra comunidad en conjunto con ellos. Y para cerrar, creo que el comienzo de esta solución se da dentro de las aulas y con más gitanos romaníes pudiendo tomar lugares de poder y más romaníes educados con excelencia. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you so much, Cristo.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to turn it over online to Nazarene Nedzmazin from Kosovo. Nazarene, thank you for being here. Nazarene, yeah,
It keeps muting and unmuting.
looks like it's going on and off mute.
That was him. That's him.
Nazarene, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you now. Thank you so much for being here, and we want to give you a couple minutes on the discussion. So thank you so much. Great to see you.
Duma Romane. Romaneca Davduma. Ashunelma.
We can hear you, yes.
Polikarautu me desavarem se ve kaldena min bekova paneli but o Mr. Hadidit kan lenje barosast bebach tavisa manushenje se vesikote ajveke kva paneli. Mesimo nezire nejmedin piando se mani Kosovska Mitrovica Kosovo ajudisarani Francuska. Amen se meni kamera organizacija se ve Karlope urit. Unija Romenji, a ne diaspora către bivša Purani Iugoslavia, koja organizacija menča damle još Katriniave štinatu beš, so se diklam kamare hakaja naj respektui me. Opuči pesi kaj Roma ano Kosovo će dluje kromocid. Pena Romocid taj etnika no Koslipe. Kaj Roma ano Kosovo živi srdej ak efta Vekora, eftašo brša, ak je Mitrovica si ak trišo brša, lende čerase sa perade, kana sa Kumanovski sporazum, samo sa potpisime ko 9.6.99. Kumanovski sporazum, znači ano juni i njavrš na to berš, Romane čerase sa sistematski perade e manusha se mora sta tenace.
They lost their houses and then became refugees.
Temu čempere čerasu se navlo in protekcija. Katar.
They not received any protection.
Kursi
himself, and therefore the translation is quite challenging. I will have to ask the speaker to, or somebody will have to switch off the interpreter.
It's
hard to translate that way. So carry the translation. So the houses have been burned
Forese, Ano Kosovo.
Which happened throughout Kosovo and Mitrovica.
Potepe lende će bilo etnikano Koslipe. But manusha se samarde, mudarde, najmentačno statistiko.
Many Roma people have been murdered.
Mate bistrake ano Kosovo si dishot e shohar dëshmire Roma, so si desh de 5% katër sa e dizutne.
As we know, we have a large number of Roma people living in Kosovo, and
Sar pendem Anglalder, a mesam kote shëri bërshënca ke besha mesam tanese manusha. Kanadlau këfor Andre, e Roma në vlonën protekse lendar, durade, butë Roma në shle. Sfaku në shlo kashe I sërda, a disave Roma se ve qile kote, lëndje qërde kampora. Man si më bari arkiva ka tërkova, si më sliki, qërdem raportora, sem poeti, si më filmora. Gjërgjive në e kompenzacija ofte. Ma Angla Roma kaj qutelen. Qutelen ani shkolla Vuk Karadžić ano zveçan I 4 km katër Mitrovica. Me kat penapmen që ke zamplo katër Mitrovica, se koja materja gjanavla maj shukar, maj laçe. Tabi qërde kampo aver ano Leposavić, susijek 8 km, shovar 8 km katër Mitrovica, ko severni deo. Kalama në shake se sa një shkolla, len gjelotit dhe qollë terna o Bernard Kushner sa u sasa administratori katër UN. Sa volen ofte një ajuti sërda, e manusha se sa nasvale, bokale, pe kondicje gjivdimase burgjungale, si jam e katërkova film, sa të penaftë me gjë ansim arhiva. Pala kodovaka I trubulla që gjallë që mu qeni shkolla, që duron kotare e në shalde manusha, që rde e kampore. Kaj qute manushen? Qutelen pi puv kaj si otrovo, saturnizmu, olovo, koter që rde o kamp Žitkovac. Pala dova që rde o kampo Qeshmin Lug. Taj që rde pala kodova Kablarevo. E ashqera, francuskaci, italijaci, se e bešljan koja puranika sarna, von asvajli, von duriledotar, a qute romena kana ankova kampo. Koje se sa I garaža katar e ashqerijaci, katar I Jugoslavjaci, atëherë ankova vakti. E kondici që vdase se burgju gale. O puqi pesi, sosim pabarda mare qera, trarlemen ka të mare qera, a qërdej kampore romenës. Sosi I destrukcija e romenjë sasa ka në dlau këfor kote, o kafor, ka në sasa uen kote. O puqi pesi kova. Sosa gjive na e kompenzacija romenës. Sosi e Roma na e pingjardesër viktimi. Na vloro me protekcija. Svako na shlo kaj gjelo. Sar pendem Anglalder si but qavoresave o trovisajli, katër saturnizmu, olovu. Kolačave na vlone e tretmanu. Sara veren qavoren. Le nibi qaldelen as ano London, as ano Paris, as ano New York që të saston. Vja gjive si ke si but në svale. Amen sa vesama sa nga ti dishull të shohar dhe shmilje Roma. Maj busam avrala në diaspora. Amare hakea në respektime. Sose si kova. Dika visto manusha me Davik Bari Pačiv e Soraja. Lači politika si but lači, but shukar penda. Ke si e bëngje manusha sa već je reni politika Romani. Najdiskriminacija samo kad regađe, disave. I majbari diskriminacija si kad je Roma, sa već si pe funkcije bare. Ano SCE, ano ODIR, ano RTF, te pavertana, se di qope len kanalen nisa far rezultati. So trubupet e qërdopi. Trubupet e qërdopi jek remont, jek selekcija. Kala manusha sa vet një qërde shukar për I buqi. Nek duron. nek mu qenë o kolengje që savesi që ma rempe që masi. Ko dolese të më organizacija kao për që qype. Për qap ka të më organizacija ko spisarente që rem tuva. Vijek më nga vëtë penaftë në që. Ka manusha e romen në vlonë istro tretmano në Evropa sara veren në shalde manushen. Ka vija gjive le nalin papira, nalin një la. Një den le një la. Pala e bish heduit besh. Nasa mundaro Kosovo. Vjan deri Bosna e Hercegovina. Vjan deri Serbia. Koteke sa maripe. Sose na isto tretmano sa e viktimenci. O puči pe si kote. Sose si ke ja banji politika. Gudbare love gjele romenci. Ama kolla love nires leke Roma. Kaj gjele kala donaci. Trubu ke ja politika sa visi gjia gjive te parovope, te menjope. Te diqope ka ve gjal bud banje. Kaj i diskriminacija romenci maj bud barili sam ani Unija, UN, Evropaci, nego Anglalder, sosi, upuću pe si palim sosi. Me tu menje šaj pena but, sema so do te doktorenca sa ve, gjeleće čeren analize per Romani Čavore, saro doktor Zoran Savić, sa večer de studije Katar o saturnizmu, ta vi avera, Viopol Polanski, čer da je klačo dokumentarno filmu, Vivov Hramosarda, ali sose na reakcija. Sose sai viktime na egal, na isto. Kaj si bari diskriminacija. Ma se ma buteva čarav, ali sama će but, niđe na dalšajci mot haftu benže, saka vas u penaf, sima manahiva, sima fotografije, da svira. Mangav, ako mangentu men kovače dav, te koristi, kaj te vol, amare manushenje soma ilače, sarek dokumentacija. A me but pena katër holokaust. Shukar si kuva, najni se far problemi. Ali angladar pena pa që o prala ndër Španija, kaj o procesus diskriminacije, taj ekstreminacije Romano nije čadilo katër o drugi svjetski rat, o dujto sva modaripe. Kaj vopsi o procesu si vađe, ali metode na isto.
Nezri, I really appreciate your updates from Kosovo. And actually, we appreciate you being here today. And we have an extension of your discussion from Bakshim Abish, who's also online, to continue the conversation. And thank you so much. And if Bakshim is on and can unmute, maybe we can continue the intervention there for 2 minutes from Bakshim. And thank you, Nezri. We really appreciate you and the update on the situation in Kosovo and well beyond. So Bakshim, if you can hear us and unmute, we look forward to your intervention.
Yeah, thank you for the given opportunity. I'm very delighted for being part of this webinar. As a matter of fact, the discussion that is going on is very interesting and speaks by itself about the injustices that have been done historically throughout centuries. And given the circumstances and the discussion topic that you are developing in this panel, I thought that is very needful just to reconfirm of everything what you have said, and basing the experiences of Kosovo and the statements that have been made. I wanted to highlight some of the issues that are very practical, in practical terms, describe all the issues that are facing in Kosovo, considering that the war was going on and considering that Nezmedin, who I know since year 2000, have testimony. In our case, considering that Advancing Together is very present and it in collaboration with other organizations, Roma organizations that work in Kosovo, we consider that it is indispensable the involvement of Roma in the process of transitional justice and dealing with the past processes, considering the fact that this process has been started. I mean, Miriam was in her speech mentioned some experiences while she was in Kosovo, and I have to admit that not very much has been done in this discussion. The process of exclusion of Roma in the process in the transitional justice processes and dealing with the past speaks by itself with the fact that there was this process, that even if the non-governmental organization have tried their best to be part of the processes, this access has been denied. And what I want to bring to your attention is the facts and the dates of this, of when to start to deal with these processes. I mean, there is this strategy that is taking place in Kosovo on transitional justice and dealing with the past, and the current circumstances speak about the fact that the date that within the strategies have been spoken about speaks about 11th of June 1999. We are witnesses that the Roma have been persecuted and have been victims of murder, rape, before the war, during the war, and after the war. So currently what we are trying to do is to negotiate with the government and the Ministry of Justice in this case to see if we can extend the date after the 11th of June 1999, because as Nejo is mentioning, the Mitrovica case is a visible element that the torsion, that the atrocities that have been conducted speaks about after June 99. Transitional justice in our processes, as has been mentioned earlier, needs to be somehow documented. First, in our experience, we need to enable and to give the opportunity for Roma to speak by themselves about what they have experienced, but also to conduct research which collects testimonies. As Nejo was mentioning, most of the Roma are pushed to flee their houses and live in diaspora or in the region. So we are trying our best with international donors and with funding organizations to see if we conduct research in cooperation with a couple of organizations and our diaspora, and try to bring this process based on the facts and see if the narratives, not only the written narratives in trial processes and so on take place, but also the social narratives can incorporate the Roma element in it. We are very aware of the fact that Roma, more than 200 Roma are missing under the current circumstances, and still we don't know their whereabouts. We know that Roma women were also victims of rape. We know that most of the Roma houses that are expelled are, they don't exist, those houses any longer, and we have great deal of difficulties to bring the justice in their place. The discussion, the ongoing discussion so far, considering the political environment, the changes in the government, etc., and so on, our discussion so far have been developed jointly with the German Council for Sinti and Roma and international embassies, certain embassies, so that we can start to develop a conceptual project which brings a consensus first among the Roma in Kosovo and Kosovo Roma in diaspora, so that we slowly approach the issue with necessary sensitiveness and consideration of not disturbing the environment, if you understand the context, because the political situation is fragile. When you talk about Kosovo, it's very obvious that Roma continue to be subject of discrimination, and political environment, especially in the opposition, current governmental opposition, are not that favorable. So this is this is so far my note on this, and I want to thank you again for the given opportunity to address the Mass.
Bakshim, thank you so much for those updates and being here online with us today. And I know we're at time. I'm going to take just a few more minutes, and maybe this will shorten our lunch just slightly, but briefly, I know that Genoveva Sotirova is on from Bulgaria. And Genoveva, if you can unmute yourself, we're so glad you're here. And please, for 2 minutes, at the end of our session here, please provide us an update from your end, and thank you so much. And we are not able to hear you.
Please unmute.
If you can unmute yourself. Looks like you're still on mute.
Is she speaking in Romani or another language?
In English.
Okay.
Okay, we can see you and we can hear you. We'll give you 2 minutes here. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll be very short. From
And it looks like there's a connection issue, and technology is great until it's not. Genoveva, can you hear us?
yes, I
Switch off your camera. Try switching off your camera.
okay. Are you hear me now? Okay. I'm from Bulgaria, as I say, and I don't receive chance for medical treatment for my hepatitis B from 10 years ago. And this is make me sterilized. I'm from Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, we have a lot of big Roma Muslim community who have forced to change his name before 14 years ago. This is, we call revival process against all Muslims community in Bulgaria. Also, I'm born with Muslim names who discovered before 2 months how I was born. My original name was Metrova. So why I share this? Because Roma Muslims in Bulgaria, we are discriminated by 2 reasons. First, before our ethnic group Roma original, and second, because our Muslim religion. That's why I'm here to stop at this. And second, I want to ask you how you plan to empower Roma women for education and new skills. That's why I'm here. Thank you for attention.
Shupak here as well. And Genoveva, thank you for being on here and for your remarks from Bulgaria. And one more intervention from Marina Shupak in the room.
Yes, thanks a lot. Can I speak from here?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Right here.
Thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. My name is Marina Shupak, and I support Secretariat of the United Nations Forum on Minority Issues, which is a subsidiary body of the Human Rights Council, and one of the few UN mechanisms focused specifically on minorities. And I would like to thank organizers and participants of this event, both in Geneva and online, for this unique opportunity to learn from your experiences. And I just wanted to quickly follow up on a point which was raised by several speakers today about the importance of Roma leadership and Roma participation, and bring a concrete example related to the UN Forum on Minorities. So last year, thanks to impressive advocacy by Roma leaders, the final report of the forum contained a specific recommendation to the states to recognize Holocaust of Roma people. So the report of the UN Forum, and here I quote, says that states should formally recognize, teach the history of, and commemorate the Holocaust of Roma minority that took place during the Second World War. So I would like to use this opportunity and thank you for your continuous engagement with the UN Forum, and also encourage to participate at the 15th session of the UN Forum this year. It will happen on 1st and 2nd December in Geneva, and the registration will be open by the end of September. So we are really looking forward to hear more of your expertise during the forum this year as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marina. We do have a question online, but Claude is just going to briefly summarize here that may lead into our next session after lunch.
Yeah, Martin Kovacs, who has long-term experience in thinking about these questions, has posted a quite extensive sort of set of reflections on the question and answer, and the questions reflect on the ways in which after 1989, there's been very much a deepening of exclusion of Roma. And he's asking at the end of that, whether memorialization and reconciliation activities, whether there's a risk that initiatives of this kind might actually deepen social divisions, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe. And if so, how such risks can be mitigated. I think it's too heavy. It's an extremely interesting thought, but it's kind of too heavy for us to deal with at 2 minutes before lunch. So my proposal is going to be that Lina, who is moderating the next panel, might open with some of the thinking.
Sorry, but it's the same question that fascists are asking in Spain.
Okay, fine. But I'm suggesting that it's a good
beginning in memory.
That we address the thought and the question in the next panel. So on that note, I'll hand over to Nathan, back to Nathan to close. I just want to point out again on housekeeping, Federico has arrived. He's going to take some of you somewhere to cash checks. He knows more about that than I do. We meet back here. Otherwise, for those of you who are not going with Federico, the cafeteria is just over there. For those of you joining online and in the room, the next session starts at a time which is in the future. 2:10. Good. At 2:10 Geneva time, meeting in a little less than 2 hours. So please come back to this room and come back online in 2 hours.
And I want to just thank all of our panelists today and our speaker, Julius, and everyone who participated online. It truly makes this a global event to use this technology and have the level of participation that you have interacting through Zoom and through the chat and through the hashtags and through social media. Continue this conversation in those forms of communication online. And but the themes that came out to me in this conversation was that not recognizing the past is another form of oppression. And that we heard about generational past today. We heard about recent past, and then we heard about past from only yesterday. And really all of this past is very present to us. And that there's this strong need for Romani voices and advocacy and sharing the stories and having the courage and inspiring others by sharing your stories through this advocacy, telling your stories, the impact of the human story to influence and shape policy, to educate governments, international organizations, the general public, the media, human rights NGOs. I mean, as Romani, we may know of these stories that are being discussed today, but I learned a lot in this discussion today about things that I didn't know that experts shared and people who are living this shared. And so we have to get beyond this room and beyond this Zoom with those stories together. And so I just want you all to be inspired by what you heard today. Know that you are leaders in this space. Use your voices through every means you have possible to share those stories and share those stories for others. And we thank you again for this session and for all your participation. So we will break for lunch and we will resume at 2:10 Geneva time for the session on the present. Thank you so much.